Listen closely, because what I'm about to say may explain the deepest confusion of your heart. Have you ever loved someone who pulled away the moment things became real? Someone who said they cared, but acted like your love was a burden? What if I told you they didn't hate you? They hated what loving you awakened inside them. Stay with me, because this truth can free you from self-blame and change how you see love forever. Love is not rejected by the avoidant because it is weak. Love is rejected because it is powerful. Here is the first truth. Love exposes what they've spent a lifetime hiding. When you come close, you don't just offer affection. You awaken memories. Memories of unmet needs, of emotions that were never held, of a child who learned that depending on anyone was dangerous. So when you love them deeply, their nervous system doesn't feel comfort. It feels alarm, not because you're doing something wrong, but because intimacy removes the armor they survived with. They don't hate love. They fear what love reveals. The second reason is this. Love threatens their sense of control. Avoidance learned early that control meant safety. Feel less, need less, expect less. So when love asks them to open, to soften, to lean in, it feels like standing on the edge of a cliff without a parachute. Your emotional needs feel like demands, not because they are unreasonable, but because the avoidant never learned how to meet needs without losing themselves. So instead of saying, I'm scared, they pull away. Instead of saying, I need time, they create distance. Control becomes their comfort, and love feels like chaos. And here is the third reason. This one is sacred and painful. Love mirrors their unhealed wounds. You become a reflection. Your presence highlights everything they never received but still crave. And facing that pain requires courage they were never taught how to summon. So the mind chooses protection over transformation, distance over growth, silence over truth. It looks like rejection, but it is actually self-preservation. Now hear this and hear it deeply. Their withdrawal is not proof that you were unlovable. It is proof that you touched something real. Love does not destroy avoidance. Unhealed fear does. And this is where wisdom steps in. You cannot love someone into healing. You cannot sacrifice yourself to make another feel safe. Divine love is not self-abandonment. It is truth wrapped in compassion. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop chasing, stop explaining, and stand rooted in your worth. Because when love is healthy, it does not beg to be chosen. It stands. It glows. It waits only where reciprocity lives. If an avoidant ever heals, it will not be because someone proved their value. It will be because they finally learned that closeness is not a threat. It is a home. And until that day comes, remember this. You were not too much. You were simply asking the wrong heart to hold what it was never taught to carry. Let that truth release you. Let it restore your dignity, and let it guide you toward a love that does not run from light, but recognizes it. Avoidants confuse love with danger because intimacy activates old emotional wounds in ways they do not consciously understand. What looks like emotional coldness on the surface is often a nervous system that learned, very early in life, that closeness comes with a cost. For them, love is not remembered as warmth or safety. It is remembered as unpredictability, disappointment, or emotional overwhelm. When affection arrives now, the body reacts before the mind can reason. The heart does not say, this is love. It says, this is familiar pain. Many avoidants grew up in environments where emotional needs were minimized, ignored, or inconsistently met. They learned that reaching out did not guarantee comfort, and sometimes even brought shame or rejection. Over time, the child adapts by becoming self-sufficient, emotionally restrained, and internally guarded. This adaptation once kept them safe, but in adulthood it becomes a silent barrier to intimacy. When someone genuinely loves them, the closeness presses against that old survival strategy, and the body responds as if it is under threat. Intimacy does something powerful and frightening. It dissolves emotional distance. Distance is where avoidants feel regulated. Distance gives them space to breathe, think, and feel in control. Love, however, shortens that distance. It invites presence, vulnerability, and emotional exposure. For someone whose early experiences taught them that exposure leads to pain, intimacy does not feel like connection. It feels like losing protection. Their nervous system enters fight or flight, even if the partner is kind, patient, and emotionally available. This is why avoidants often pull away just as relationships deepen. The closer someone gets, the louder the internal alarm becomes. Their mind may search for logical explanations, finding faults, questioning compatibility, or convincing themselves they need independence. But underneath those thoughts is a more primal reaction. Old wounds are being touched. Feelings that were buried long ago begin to surface. Grief that was never processed, longing that was never allowed, fear that was never soothed. Love becomes the trigger, not because love is wrong, but because it opens doors that were sealed for survival. There is also a deep confusion between intensity and danger. Because emotional closeness was associated with discomfort in the past, the avoidant brain learns to interpret strong feelings as warning signs. When love grows, when attachment forms, when emotional bonds strengthen, the body mislabels these sensations as risk. Calm distance feels safe. Emotional depth feels overwhelming. So instead of leaning in, they retreat, not to punish the other person, but to calm their own internal chaos. Another layer of this confusion is the fear of dependency. Intimacy implies mutual reliance, and reliance reminds the avoidant of a time when relying on others failed them. Love asks for trust, and trust requires surrender. Surrender, to an avoidant, feels like handing over power they once lost unwillingly. Even when they desire closeness, a part of them believes that needing someone is dangerous. So they reject not the person, but the vulnerability that love requires. What makes this especially painful is that many avoidants are unaware of these dynamics. They do not wake up deciding to fear love. Their reactions feel automatic, justified, even necessary. They may genuinely believe that they are better alone, or that relationships feel suffocating, without realizing that what they are truly avoiding is unresolved emotional pain. Love becomes the mirror reflecting wounds they never had the space or support to heal. In this way, intimacy is not experienced as nourishment, but as exposure. Love feels like standing unprotected in a place where they were once hurt. Until those old wounds are acknowledged and soothed, the body will continue to confuse connection with danger. And so the avoidant withdraws, not because love is unwanted, but because it awakens a fear that has been waiting quietly beneath the surface. For the avoidant, control is not about dominance or ego, it is about survival. Long before adulthood, they learned that staying in control of their emotions, expectations, and attachments was the safest way to navigate relationships. Control became the substitute for security. When life felt unpredictable and emotional needs were not reliably met, the avoidant adapted by depending only on themselves. This internal rule, I am safest when I need nothing from anyone, became deeply ingrained. Love, however, challenges this rule at its core. Intimate relationships require a softening of control. They ask for openness, emotional responsiveness, and a willingness to be influenced by another person. For the avoidant, this feels profoundly threatening. Love introduces variables they cannot fully manage: another person's feelings, needs, reactions, and expectations. Even healthy emotional requests can register as pressure, not because they are excessive, but because they disrupt the avoidant's carefully maintained inner equilibrium. What others experience as closeness, the avoidant experiences as loss of autonomy. Control provides the avoidant with a sense of stability. Emotional independence allows them to regulate their nervous system without relying on anyone else. They learned early that relying on others led to disappointment, so they mastered self-containment. When love deepens, that self-contained system is challenged. Emotional bonds naturally create interdependence, and interdependence feels like risk. The avoidant fears that once they fully open, they will be consumed, controlled, or overwhelmed by the relationship. This fear is often irrational in the present, but it is emotionally real because it is rooted in past experience. This is why emotional needs are often misinterpreted by avoidants as demands. A partner's desire for reassurance, consistency, or deeper connection can feel like an attempt to take something from them, their space, their freedom, their identity. Instead of hearing, "I want to feel close to you," they hear, "I am about to lose myself." Their nervous system reacts by tightening, pulling back, or creating emotional distance. Withdrawal becomes a way to reassert control and restore internal safety. Avoidants also fear that once control is lost, they will not know how to recover. Vulnerability feels irreversible to them. They worry that if they let someone see their inner world, they will not be able to retreat if things go wrong. This fear makes them cautious about expressing emotions, committing deeply, or allowing dependence to form. Love feels like stepping into unknown territory without a clear exit plan, so they keep one foot out the door, not because they lack feelings, but because they are terrified of being trapped by them. Another dimension of this control dynamic is the belief that emotions are dangerous when uncontained. Many avoidants were never taught how to process feelings in a healthy way. Emotions were either dismissed, punished, or ignored, so they learned to suppress them. Control, then, is not just about the relationship. It is about maintaining emotional order internally. Love stirs emotions they have spent years pushing down. Instead of experiencing those emotions as natural and manageable, they experience them as overwhelming forces that could destabilize them. Pulling away becomes a way to quiet the emotional intensity. Ironically, the avoidant's need for control often creates the very outcomes they fear. By withdrawing, they may cause confusion, hurt, or distance in the relationship, reinforcing their belief that closeness leads to problems. Yet from their perspective, withdrawal feels like relief. It restores their sense of agency. It allows them to breathe again. This relief can be mistaken for clarity, leading them to believe that leaving or distancing was the right choice. At the heart of this pattern is not a lack of love, but a lack of safety. Until an avoidant learns that closeness does not equal loss of self, control will continue to feel more comforting than connection. Love will remain something they want from a distance, close enough to feel, but far enough to stay in control. For the avoidant, love does not arrive as a blank slate. It arrives carrying echoes of the past, stirring emotional material that has been dormant but never healed. When someone loves them deeply, it acts like a mirror, reflecting back unmet needs, unresolved grief, and long-suppressed longing. This reflection is not gentle for someone who has spent years avoiding their inner wounds. Instead of feeling seen, they feel exposed. Instead of feeling cherished, they feel confronted by parts of themselves they learned to bury in order to survive. Unhealed wounds often originate in early attachment experiences where emotional attunement was inconsistent or absent. The avoidant learned that expressing vulnerability did not lead to comfort, but to disappointment, dismissal, or emotional distance. Over time, they internalized the belief that their needs were either too much or unsafe to express. These beliefs did not disappear with age, they became embedded in the nervous system. When love appears in adulthood, it activates these beliefs automatically. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. A loving partner often invites emotional presence, reassurance, and mutual dependence. For someone carrying unhealed wounds, these invitations feel like pressure points. Each request for closeness touches the ache of what they once needed but never received. Love reminds them of deprivation. It brings awareness to the emptiness they learned to numb. Rather than feeling grateful for the connection, they may feel irritated, overwhelmed, or inexplicably resistant. These reactions are defenses against pain, not rejections of the person offering love. The mirror effect of love is particularly powerful because it reveals both desire and fear at the same time. Avoidants often want intimacy deeply, even if they deny it. When love reflects that desire back to them, it creates internal conflict. Part of them longs to lean in, while another part braces for hurt. This inner tension can feel unbearable. To resolve it, the avoidant may unconsciously push the relationship away, choosing emotional distance over emotional conflict. Withdrawal becomes a way to silence the parts of themselves that are awakening. Love also highlights identity wounds. Many avoidants learn to define themselves through independence, strength, and self-reliance. Being needed threatens that identity. When a partner offers care or expresses emotional reliance, it can trigger shame or discomfort. The avoidant may feel weak for wanting closeness, or resentful for being placed in a role that requires emotional availability. This reaction is not rooted in arrogance, but in fear of losing the self they built to survive. Love challenges the old identity by asking them to become someone softer, more open, and more emotionally present. Another painful aspect of the mirror is the exposure of emotional skill gaps. Unhealed wounds often come with undeveloped emotional regulation. When love brings intense feelings to the surface, the avoidant may not know how to process them. Instead of naming fear, sadness, or longing, they experience a vague sense of discomfort. This discomfort is often projected outward. The relationship starts to feel wrong. The partner starts to feel demanding. The situation feels suffocating. In reality, it is the avoidant's internal landscape that feels unfamiliar and unsafe. The presence of love can also revive grief that was never mourned. Grief for the childhood they didn't have, for the comfort they needed but didn't receive, for the version of themselves that learned to grow up too fast. Love softens defenses just enough for that grief to rise. Facing it requires emotional courage and support, but avoidance offers a quicker escape. By pulling away, the avoidant avoids not just the relationship, but the sorrow that love awakens. This is why avoidants may seem to turn against the very people who care for them most. Love shines a light into emotional rooms that have been locked for decades. Healing would require staying present in that light, tolerating discomfort, and learning new ways to feel safe. Until that happens, the mind chooses protection over growth. Distance becomes a shield against self-awareness. Love is not hated because it is harmful, but because it reveals wounds that the avoidant has not yet learned how to heal. For the avoidant, distance is not emptiness, it is regulation. Emotional and physical space provide a sense of calm that their nervous system recognizes as safety. Where others feel lonely in separation, the avoidant often feels grounded. Distance allows them to return to a familiar internal state where expectations are low, emotional demands are minimal, and self-control is intact. This is why they can appear most at ease when they are slightly removed, even from people they care about deeply. Vulnerability, on the other hand, feels like standing unguarded. It requires openness, emotional expression, and responsiveness to another person's inner world. For someone who learned that emotional exposure led to pain or disappointment, vulnerability does not feel brave. It feels reckless. The avoidant does not experience vulnerability as connection. They experience it as risk. Distance, therefore, becomes a protective mechanism, not a rejection of love, but a return to what feels manageable. This preference for distance is often misunderstood. Partners may interpret it as indifference, lack of care, or emotional coldness. In reality, distance is how the avoidant stabilizes themselves. When closeness intensifies, their nervous system can become overstimulated. Emotional cues, needs, and expectations accumulate faster than they know how to process them. Pulling back reduces that stimulation. It quiets the internal noise. It restores a sense of control and predictability. Distance also allows the avoidant to maintain a clear sense of self. Many avoidants fear emotional enmeshment, the loss of individuality within a relationship. Early experiences may have taught them that closeness meant being consumed by another's needs or moods. As a result, they learn to protect their identity through separation. Vulnerability feels like merging, and merging feels like disappearance. By creating distance, they preserve boundaries that feel essential to their psychological survival. Another reason distance feels safer is that it minimizes emotional responsibility. Vulnerability implies responsiveness, listening, comforting, adjusting, and being emotionally present. These skills were often never modeled or taught to avoidants. When faced with a partner's emotions, they may feel inadequate or overwhelmed. Distance reduces the demand to respond in ways they don't feel equipped to handle. It offers relief from the pressure to perform emotionally. Ironically, distance can intensify the avoidant's feelings of love. When space is created, longing often replaces overwhelm. From a distance, emotions feel manageable, even romanticized. The avoidant may think about their partner more, miss them, or feel affection more clearly. This can create confusing patterns where they seem warmer when apart and colder when close. The issue is not the absence of love, but the presence of emotional intensity. Vulnerability also challenges the avoidant's belief system about strength. Many were taught, implicitly or explicitly, that showing emotion was a weakness. They learned to equate self-reliance with resilience. Vulnerability contradicts this belief by asking them to admit fear, need, or uncertainty. Even when intellectually they understand that vulnerability is healthy, emotionally it still triggers shame. Distance allows them to maintain the image of competence and control that once protected them. Over time, distance becomes the default response to emotional discomfort. It is not a conscious decision, but an ingrained habit. When tension arises, when closeness increases, when emotional conversations deepen, the body automatically seeks space. This reaction happens faster than thought. The avoidant may only later rationalize the distance with reasons that seem logical, such as needing independence or time alone. The tragedy of this pattern is that distance feels safe in the moment, but prevents the development of secure connection. Safety becomes temporary and conditional. True intimacy requires learning to stay present through discomfort, to tolerate vulnerability without retreating. Until that capacity is built, the avoidant will continue to equate safety with separation. Distance will feel like relief, even when love is genuine, and vulnerability will remain something to escape rather than embrace. For the avoidant, emotional needs are rarely experienced as neutral or reasonable requests. Instead, they often register as pressure, an invisible weight that tightens the chest and activates a desire to retreat. This reaction is not because the needs themselves are excessive, but because emotional needs were historically associated with discomfort, obligation, or failure. Early on, the avoidant learned that being needed came with consequences they could not manage. As adults, even healthy expressions of need can awaken that old association. Many avoidants grew up in environments where emotions were not handled with ease or consistency. They may have been expected to be low maintenance, independent, or emotionally mature at an early age. In some cases, they were subtly or overtly discouraged from expressing needs of their own. Over time, they internalized the belief that emotions complicate relationships. When someone now expresses a need, whether for reassurance, closeness, or communication, the avoidant does not simply hear the request. They feel the echo of past expectations and the fear of being overwhelmed by responsibility. Emotional needs also challenge the avoidant's self-concept. They often see themselves as self-sufficient and autonomous. This identity provided safety when dependence felt risky or unreliable. When a partner expresses emotional needs, it can feel like a threat to that identity. The avoidant may experience the request as an attempt to pull them into a role they are unprepared for: caretaker, emotional anchor, or constant source of reassurance. Even if the partner is not asking for anything unreasonable, the avoidant's nervous system reacts as if their freedom is being compromised. There is also a fear of inadequacy beneath this reaction. Many avoidants doubt their ability to meet emotional needs correctly because they were never taught how to navigate emotional exchanges. They fear doing it wrong. A partner's need can trigger anxiety about failing, disappointing, or being judged. Instead of expressing this fear, the avoidant may shut down or pull away. Interpreting needs as pressure becomes a way to justify withdrawal without confronting feelings of incompetence or vulnerability. Another layer is the association between needs and loss of control. Emotional needs introduce unpredictability. They require flexibility, responsiveness, and emotional availability. For someone who relies on structure and emotional containment to feel safe, this unpredictability feels destabilizing. The avoidant may worry that once they start meeting one need, more will follow. The relationship begins to feel like an escalating demand they cannot escape. This fear leads them to create emotional distance to regain a sense of control. Avoidants also tend to minimize their own needs, often without realizing it. Because they learned early that having needs was unsafe or pointless, they became experts at self-suppression. When a partner openly expresses needs, it can create discomfort not just because of the request, but because it highlights what the avoidant has denied within themselves. The partner's needs become a mirror, reflecting the avoidant's unacknowledged emotional hunger. Rather than facing that inner contradiction, the avoidant may project irritation or resistance outward. Communication around needs can also trigger avoidance because it often requires emotional dialogue. Conversations about feelings, expectations, and connection demand presence and emotional attunement. These skills were rarely practiced in the avoidant's early environment. Emotional discussions may feel draining or overwhelming, even when they are calm and respectful. The avoidant may perceive the conversation itself as pressure, regardless of tone or intention. Over time, repeated exposure to emotional needs without the tools to manage them reinforces the avoidant's belief that relationships are demanding. Each request feels like confirmation that closeness equals obligation. This belief is not rooted in reality, but in unhealed patterns. Healthy relationships involve mutual needs and mutual care, but the avoidant's nervous system has not yet learned to differentiate between healthy interdependence and emotional overload. As long as emotional needs are interpreted as threats, the avoidant will continue to retreat from intimacy. What could be an opportunity for deeper connection becomes a signal to withdraw. Until they learn that needs can be negotiated rather than endured, emotional closeness will feel less like connection and more like pressure pressing in from all sides. Healing for the avoidant does not begin with forcing closeness or trying to become someone they are not. It begins with self-awareness, the quiet, courageous act of noticing what is happening inside without judgment. For years, fear has been mistaken for preference. Distance has been labeled independence. Emotional shutdown has been justified as logic. Self-awareness gently separates truth from survival strategy. It allows the avoidant to recognize that their reactions are not flaws in character, but learned responses to experiences that once required protection. Fear operates automatically. It lives in the body, not in thought. When intimacy increases, the avoidant's nervous system often reacts before the mind can catch up. Self-awareness slows this process down. It creates a pause between sensation and action. In that pause, the avoidant can begin to name what is actually happening. Tension in the chest, urge to withdraw, thoughts of escape. Naming these experiences reduces their power. What is understood no longer feels as threatening as what is unconscious. Replacing fear with inner safety is the core of healing. Inner safety is not the absence of discomfort. It is the presence of self-trust. It is the belief that emotions can be felt without being destroyed by them. Many avoidants never developed this belief because no one modeled it for them. Emotions were something to avoid, suppress, or control. Healing involves learning that feelings rise and fall, that they can be regulated rather than escaped. This learning happens gradually through repeated experiences of staying present and surviving vulnerability. Self-awareness also reveals the difference between current reality and past memory. When intimacy triggers fear, the body reacts as if old threats are returning. Through reflection, the avoidant can begin to ask, is this situation actually dangerous, or does it feel familiar? This question is transformative. It shifts the nervous system from automatic defense to conscious choice. The avoidant begins to see that the present partner is not the past caregiver, and that emotional needs are not the same as emotional harm. Another aspect of healing is developing emotional literacy. Avoidants often struggle to identify and express emotions beyond a narrow range. Self-awareness expands this range. By learning to name feelings, fear, sadness, longing, frustration, the avoidant builds internal clarity. Emotions become signals rather than enemies. This clarity reduces overwhelm, making closeness feel more manageable. When emotions are understood, they no longer demand escape. Inner safety also grows through self-compassion. Many avoidants carry shame about their relational patterns. They may believe they are broken, cold, or incapable of love. Self-awareness challenges these narratives. It reframes avoidance as a strategy that once made sense. Compassion softens resistance. Instead of fighting themselves, avoidants learn to support themselves. This internal support becomes a foundation for external connection. Healing requires tolerating discomfort in small, intentional ways. Avoidants do not need to plunge into intense vulnerability. They need gradual exposure to closeness while staying regulated. Self-awareness helps them recognize when they are within their window of tolerance and when they are not. This awareness allows for pacing rather than avoidance. Each moment of staying present, even briefly, builds confidence that closeness can be survived. As inner safety increases, fear loses its authority. The avoidant begins to experience intimacy, not as invasion, but as shared space. Control is no longer the only way to feel safe. Emotional distance becomes a choice rather than a reflex. This shift does not happen overnight, but it is profound. Healing is not about becoming dependent. It is about becoming secure enough to connect. When fear is replaced with self-awareness and inner safety, the avoidant gains access to what was always there, the capacity for deep, meaningful love. Not forced, not demanded, but freely given from a place of grounded presence. Thank you for giving your attention, your heart, and your courage to receive this message. May it serve as a light on your path of understanding and healing. Goodbye for now. But remember, every step toward awareness is a step toward the love that no longer runs from you.